I'm now joined by Tony Nicholls, founder and CEO at PR and communications agency Good Talent Media. Tony, thanks for joining us.
Oh, wonderful to be here, Erin. Thanks for the opportunity.
Tony, firstly, tell us about the services that Good Talent Media offers and some of the projects that you and the team have worked on.
Yeah, so we're a full services communications agency. I left the ABC 6.5 years ago now. So did a tour of duty across a lot of different newsrooms as a working journo. And I was just sort of, as my little boys were getting bigger, I was assessing how do I stay in this media passion, but be a better dad, be home a bit more. So I started media training as a solo service, so around the boardrooms of the country. And when I was in front of these CEOs, I could just see really clearly they were, clueless about media, didn't have a clue, had no idea what a story was. In fact, terrified of the media too. That was a big learning. As a journo, I didn't have a sense of how much you kind of feared. But being on the other side now of journalism, which they call the dark side, but I'm here to tell you it's actually full of light and it's actually very beautiful. I could see very early on that there was a huge opportunity to start telling these CEO stories. So that was the birth of Good Talent Media, full services PR company. So to answer your question, so we offer PR services, and I'll get into that for you. We create industry leaders in the media. We do crisis comms as well. So we're on the promote and the protect side of our brands. We offer media training as a standalone service. And we're also registered political lobbyists, which helps us in a campaigning and advocacy sense.
Very busy. Let's focus on your crisis work. So from a crisis media perspective, what are some of the most common issues or situations that you see organisations face?
Yeah, well, I think that the crux of it, Erin, is poor leadership. So I think this country, we have a crisis of leadership, and we see it at all strata of society. They're on display daily with our politicians. And then you get into the consultancy world and you can see lots of problems with leadership. So all sectors. Now, the reason we have calamity after calamity in the media and all these organisational problems is usually leadership. So we've got poor values, poor decisions, which lead to suffering. So you've got clients, and so you've got clients that are having poor experiences, you've got staff that are having poor experiences, vulnerable people having poor experiences. All comes back to leadership. So if you're an organisation wanting to exist or get your message out there, or in fact you're very aspirational, but you've got poor values within the organisation, you've got crises ready to happen at any second. So, and that's what we're seeing in the press. So it's funny that when we always get the crisis media calls during the week. It's often late on a Friday. Phone rings, media are right onto an organisation. There's big problems. And the CEO always says to me, what do I say? What do I say? And I'm always like, well, what are you doing? What are you doing right now? And even more specifically than that, how are you helping all the victims in this situation right now? So it's your leadership, because, you can be the best crisis comms person on the planet, but unless the leader that you're assigned to help is actually doing really impressive things right now in this tough moment, it's impossible to say impressive things. So that's the big problem, opportunity. That's why we're in a booming industry. And I would dive a little bit deeper to suggest, and we do this a lot in our training, there's no such thing as an internal organizational culture anymore. Your internal culture of your organization is essentially external, 24/7, because staff are talking about you, clients are talking about you, the industry is talking about you, they see you. So you can't hide anywhere. So you need to have an elite internal culture. You need to have great values. And if you do, yes, you still may come across the odd crisis, but you're going to be looking really good in bad situations. So it's a fascinating topic.
Now, you just touched on some of these mistakes, but what are these mistakes that you see organisations making when it comes to managing crises? And what are the potential impacts to an organisation if crises are not effectively managed?
Yeah, so most organisations right now are not in a crisis, quite naturally. Just say 99.5% of organisations, there's nothing happening right now. But you've got 0.5 to 1% of organizations really in a crucible. So the biggest mistake everyone's making is what I call the head in the sand approach. So picture the graph, right? So you got the emu head in the sand, or even better, put the exec in a suit, head in the sand. Now that's the most commonly followed crisis media management approach worldwide, because execs go, oh, fantastic. No one knows about this. It's not in the media. So they kind of think crisis managed. I mean, what a tragedy, because it should come as no surprise, sadly. The most common thing we're asked in media training sessions is, what do I do if I go to the car park at the end of the day and a journo's waiting there for me with a mic? Now, that's the most commonly asked question we get. And I find that really sad, because when I get into that dialogue, it's like, why would that even be possible? Now, the reason that's possible is because, like all organizations, they're sitting on all sorts of problems, but their head's in the sand and nothing's resolved. But they're just so pleased that it's not in the media. But the fact is, it can be in the media any day, any minute. That's why they're worried about the car park doorstop. So we would suggest in a crisis media planning process that we put clients through is that we get really honest about all the crises that they're sitting on. Start building those relationships, start solving those problems, start putting new policies in place. So therefore you're getting ahead of things, you're mitigating. Then start putting statements together now while you're not in crisis. Start thinking about the handful of problems you've got. Can you get some of this proactively out in the media yourself? It's probably smarter. You're probably better off launching this story than the staff dobbing you in. So it's the head in the sand approach, most commonly followed approach worldwide. And it's only because people are ignorant, obviously, and they're scared and they're time poor and they just don't know, right? Don't ask me to fix a car or do anything manually. I don't know. I'd get an expert in. So when crisis comes, unfortunately, people think it's just too expensive. I don't get good talent media in. You look at that guy in the suit and, you can't afford the guy, right? But the thing is, this service has been extremely disrupted by ex-journos like me actually offering an elite service, very affordable pricing, even free. So you can get protected and guided. It's not like 5 years ago, you get the big fat cats just ripping everyone off. That's not the case anymore. You've got very reasonable people that can help you out. So I think there's a few barriers to getting the help. And that's why the head in the sand approach seems like the right approach.
Now, we know that some crises strike without notice, but others might be preceded by warning signs that there's trouble ahead. What are some of these early red flags? Where do we find them? And what can organisations do to stop issues becoming crises?
Well, like the warning signs are everywhere. I'll never forget being, and I can't name all these clients, obviously, but I never forget being in a room and they knew that this plant that they had was getting old. And so it wasn't no longer passing all the regulations and the laws, and it was illegal for all manner of reasons, and it was unsafe for staff to be around, etc., etc. But Erin, the profit it was making. Now, a big problem, right? And so they were really torn, like making so much money in a tough industry, and other locations weren't making so much money. And I remember saying to the guys, this is the gift of being a consultant. So if any of the students here, you go on to become a consultant, it's a really cool spot to sit in, because you're not directly employed, you're actually brought in to help. So you're not captive to all of these relationships. So I don't have a boss in the room. No one can sack me. But I'm actually there to help, whether you like the advice or not. And I remember just saying to these guys, you know what? These could be the last dollars you ever make. I know it's cool. It sounds really lucrative and nice, and your overseas owners are really impressed, but these potentially are the last dollars you'll ever make. Now, I'd be much more interested in the lifetime value of something opposed to now value of something. So that to answer your question with an example there's a red flag. We know we're breaking the law. Now, heads in the sand, people know about it. It can leak to the media in 5 seconds. So the red flags are everywhere. I mean, wouldn't even call that a big example. I call that an obvious example. If you know you've got disgruntled staff in the building, there's a red flag, because your external crisis comms should be one and the same with your internal comms. It's congruent messaging, right? So yeah, so like the red flags abound, so easy to find them.
So with all this in mind, what are your top tips, your golden rules when it comes to effective crisis communications?
Yeah, well, we talk about being proactive, honest, and clear. And we also talk about focusing on the victims, families, and friends, all of your comms. All of your comms and all of your actions should be focused around caring for everyone who's suffering right now. That's gold standard. Then, in addition to that, we talk about not communicating alone. Don't be alone in a crisis. So you don't want to be like a Cedar Meats, who is known for being a COVID cluster and putting Melbourne into 4 months of lockdown. You don't want to be known as a Ruby Princess, where the whole catastrophe started here in Oz, right? So if you're choosing to be proactive, honest, and clear, and you're choosing to focus on the victims and families and friends and really stand up as a leader and care for them and support them through this hard time. So it's those sort of comms that will pass the pub test. Now, if you are defensive and it wasn't me and legally I can't say anything, or legally I'm following all the rules here and I really can't say anything more, head in the sand, one-line statement, this is very dangerous for your reputation. Very dangerous, because the population sitting back, consuming you online, consuming you across all broadcast media. And you've got to remember this, team, whoever writes the story controls the story. So if you're choosing not to write the story because you've got your head in the sand, that's fine. The story's proceeding without you. Because the old-fashioned thinking is, well, the less we say, the less they can say. It doesn't apply. I know as a former journo, and from the ABC, right, the highest standards, we hope in the country, we would talk to anyone to get a story up. Door knock, didn't matter, did not matter. So therefore, these all manner of people that we get hold of, because we had to have talking heads for TV, they're writing the story and controlling the story, and therefore profoundly changing the trajectory of your reputation. So there's a few things. I'll just finish with one, just to add to that little mix there. Don't communicate alone. Communicate with key partners. So it can't be your brand name Cedar Meats. Well, I mean, if you were caring for all the victims, let's name some, the migrant workers in that scenario, who are terrified, getting COVID, English as a second language, very vulnerable. So if you were communicating about how you're caring for them in all this really hard time, you're doing really well. Even better, bring in the health department, bring in the peak body for abattoirs. Don't be alone in a crisis. And this, as communicators, this is how we can help our clients. We communicate in this fashion. And you know what? We make them look really good in really tough situations. We actually enhance their reputation as a result. But we can't do any of that until the leaders have the paradigm shift and see, oh, this actually makes sense. Now, I live in the paradigm shift world. I'm always educating leaders on the value of this approach. And if they don't approach it like this, I'm probably not going to work with them because I can't help them.
Now, you've just mentioned your career as a journalist with the ABC. What does the media look for when reporting crisis events, and how can organisations work most effectively with media through crisis situations?
So from, on the dark side, like the dark side I'm on, I guess, organisational side, we're the only people that use this language crisis. We're the only people that use this language reputation management. When you're a journo, there's no such thing. There's just cracking good stories. And the worse, the better, right? Of course. It's brilliant. So you're just on massive yarns and you're loving it. And so journo's side of the world, you are, the news cycle spins furiously. It's an emotion cycle. It's not a news cycle, right? It's fueled with emotion. So what are journos looking for? We're looking to connect the dots with emotion. Now, we call them in the media world case studies. So if we're at Cedar Meats in the abattoir there, what are we really aggressively trying to do? We're getting in front of all those migrant workers. We want them, the media do want the tears. they have COVID and they fear for their life. We want the most emotional stuff possible. Now, I'm a student now. I know that the owners there didn't speak. That's fine. We won't bother with them. So we'll speak to other industry experts in the meat sector to highlight how poor their practices are. That's fine. So we're searching for emotion, or the media is searching for emotion because it rates, it clicks, it engages. And then obviously there's fact checking to do in the core and around the periphery. And I think I just don't recall the second part of your question there, Erin.
Around how organisations can work most effectively with media through crisis situations.
Well, it gets back to our earlier dialogue there. So like you need to make a call. Are you going to write the story to control the story here? Or are you going to put your head in the sand? So like more colloquial language, are you going to get totally smashed and potentially not recover? And then just sit back and blame the media. So, or are you choosing to get some of your narrative out there? That would require picking up the phone and telling your version of the story. That would require having some paragraphs. You may not have to interview. So we talk about organisations having a dark page. So having a page no one can see on their website right now, and you're launching that. That's the digital face of your crisis. So they're the choices. I never forget, law firms often call us in to help their clients. So I got called up to this fancy law firm within these new relationships. I had the client and the lawyer there, the Herald Sun's on this big mahogany table, quite literally, and beautiful views over the city. And I'm new to this relationship and I'm called in to help. And they're penning through the Herald Sun, reading the article. And it was like, she got that wrong. She didn't do this. And you're complaining about the article. Clients, two people and the lawyer, and they're just ho-humming, media's dead, right? Media's dead. And I'm totally new to these relationships, just getting my head across the story. And I just said, well, did she give you an opportunity to interview? And she said, oh, yeah, she called. No, but we hung up. No. And I said, well, why are you surprised everything's wrong here? Like, you had a crack at participating. Now, this is the paradigm shift, right? In that moment, brand new to that relationship, it was not possible for them. They hate the media, don't trust the media, head in the sand, right? It's much more comfortable. It feels nice having your head in the sand. So, but we work with those clients for a long time after that. And it took me a while to get them to change their thinking. And then we started participating. Then we started getting their side of the story out. It's a whole different world then.
And of course, the media is just one stakeholder an organisation needs to consider when managing a crisis. How important is it for an organisation to keep all of its various stakeholders informed? And how should this communication be prioritised?
So for me, you're talking about internal comms there. Now this is so important, and we can give you so many examples, because you don't want your staff or really vital internal stakeholders learning about all of this from the media. That's a massive mistake. So you need to be updating everyone non-stop internally, because it's all these internal stakeholders that can spill to the media any second. And we talked about emotion before. The media will be waiting in car parks, will be waiting out the front, and will talk to anyone who walks out. So you need elite communication updating everyone, but you also need elite communication on the protocol on dealing with the media if they were to reach out to you. And I advise everyone on their employment contracts to not allow them to communicate in the media. So this is very important, because you need to protect all of your IP and protect your reputation. But that internal comms is vital. Look to COVID right now with all these clusters, and look to Newmarch House. So they had 17 deaths there in Sydney, 4 in 24 hours. Look to St Basil's. I think there was multiple cases there that spilled out around the Cedar Meats time. So it wasn't until now, Newmarch House was an incredible example. The families, who are the victims in the crisis there? If you've got elderly people dying of COVID, it's not just the people dying of COVID, it's all their families, right? So it's those vital internal stakeholders that were never communicated to. And they were so desperately worried about their loved ones. So what did they do out of exasperation? Lined up on the lawns and spoke to Koshi and Carl every morning. because who else can help, right? It's so sad. But it's so obvious. Now, Newmarch took too long to get their internal comms right. But when they did, all those morning interviews stopped. Not because they ever said once, don't talk to the media. That would be a mistake. That would get them talking to the media. But they brought them in-house. They involved them in decision-making. They communicated to them. They, in fact, got a instant text messaging system going. Twice, 3 times a day, daily updates, daily phone calls. This is the era of not putting too much in writing when the crisis is that acute. It's so basic, isn't it? These stupid emails go out, these rubbish internal comms go out and straight into the media. We saw one only Herald Sun the other day, you're across the school, primary school teacher. Yeah, so the canteen staff leaked something, he put something in an email, now it's all over the Herald Sun. I mean, it's just case studying how not to do it, right? It's poor leadership. That's the core of it, is poor leadership. Then go put manifest that in writing. You beauty, we'll just pass it on to the biggest newspaper in the country. So another way around that would be, hopefully be a good leader to start with. Then you want verbal comms. You want whip meetings. None of that can be ditched into the media. And then you're keeping everyone up to date.
Now, how has the rise of new media impacted crisis communications? On the one hand, we have the benefits of reach and efficiency, but on the other, the dangers of misinformation being shared, as just one example. Is new media a blessing or a curse in a crisis?
Well, it's all of the above. So you are going to if you're in a decent media crisis, it's going to break on social and you're going to be catching up with it. You just have to accept it. And then it's a great tool for you to use to get your messaging out there. So like we mentioned, the dark page there, ideally you're managing this digitally, and there's a dark page you keep dragging people back to, which is now a published incident response page with all the updated info. You're monitoring your social, you're dealing with things live. So if there's problems on social, people are getting it wrong, you're correcting them, because otherwise this misinformation just keeps going. So you're correcting them. So a dedicated staff member, at least one on there, monitoring all other media, getting back to your dark page. Now, if people are going, really, I forget the word for it, if they're being awful, probably, there you go, thank you. So they're the ones you direct messaging, trying to get on the phone. You want to get them offline. So that's a bigger job, right? But you got to get the really bad ones offline, because they're not helping anyone. And then obviously at that point, then you're getting them offline, you're chatting to them, you're appeasing them in some way. And then maybe if that's not working, you're blocking them. Now, remembering also on the digital front, now Southwest Airlines is a good one to Google and just follow how the airline, how they do things globally. So you're using YouTube for some of your statements. You're using that. Now you are boosting your statements, getting them out to big audiences, certainly to newsrooms. And you're doing that right across your social. So I don't think it's good or bad, but it is. So we're using it to our advantage.
Now, we hear the word transparency used a lot today. You spoke earlier about being honest and being clear. Reflecting on your media career, do you see organisations now taking a more humble or transparent approach to crisis management? And what's behind this shift?
Well, I think organisations are realising that they're dealing with a real beast when it comes to the 24 digital news cycle. It's unrelenting. And in some cases, it's not going to stop until it breaks you. So look at Eddie Maguire, dethroned. So if you're falling on the wrong side of the political debate, the parts of the media are going to campaign against you. So we see lots of examples of that. So then you look at the Tex Walker example, Adelaide Football Club. Now, obviously, poor leadership, poor decisions, and then the club steps in. They try to mend that relationship. There's a photo of the two together, apparently. So apparently there's a better relationship now. Tex is banned from footy for the rest of the year, then comes out with a video mea culpa. It's pretty textbook sort of response, isn't it? You can't defend the indefensible. Don't front an interview. Control it with video. But the big victim here is the aggrieved, but there's a bigger community as well. So So I think, is that transparency? I don't know. I saw through it as quite wooden and insincere myself. I did, but I know the techniques and steps. But I think everyone knows the techniques and steps. You see it coming when it's a bit insincere. That for me was an example of that. Particularly the bit reaching out to the person he racially abused. I thought that was to pull him in for that photo op. I just thought, you're not winning me over, one audience member. So look, I think it gets back to leadership, Erin, really. Like people are out there faking it, but we're not stupid. The audience is more sophisticated than ever. If you're actually just a really good-hearted leader, you can be transparent in the worst of situations, but we know we're in good hands. This leader will get us through. So we're in a real crisis of leadership. And I think if leaders with poor values are using these techniques, we're going to see through it. So transparency is the goal, but I think a bigger and better goal is just to make better decisions.
So the $1 million question, how can organisations turn crisis events into opportunities?
Like, it is an opportunity. Unfortunately, so few are doing it well. Like, it's difficult to point out to those examples. So I'll fly through some terrible examples. So they're a bit easier, and I'll warm up into the one good one I can think of now. I might think of more. So you got Newmarch House, business over. Can you believe during that they were advertising great cheap rooms? Talk about getting your digital comms wrong, right? You got to pause all advertising. So Dreamworld, Ardent Leisure, go and give the CEO a bonus while the place is still a crime scene. Bodies are still in the morgue, right? Ardent Leisure has never recovered from that. Now, Red Cross Blood Bank, one of the biggest data breaches in Australian history. Who breaks that story? You probably across it. They did. So we're talking about the most. I used to, probably in my uni days, I used to give blood. Right, I was a bit more altruistic, and I remember the questions, very personal questions about how you conduct your life, and very personal, and all of that personal data on all of us in the open forum. Now, if a blood donor had broke that story, or a staff member, or so that would have been an awful story for Red Cross. Then they're on the back foot, and the trust in that organisation gone. But here we have an organisation. It's the most awful thing they could do for people who are keeping the hospitals afloat. But they came out total mea culpa and apologised. So there's an example of turning a crisis into, wow, they are incredible leaders. So those opportunities do abound. Another example, Maria Sharapova, the drug cheat tennis player, who broke that story? Well, she did, right? So, she's got this social audience of millions and this income that would stay with her for the rest of her life. So she broke it in a convincing way, I thought, and created a very elaborate story, which the media ran for a couple of days. So kind of a win there in the worst possible scenario. So I think if you're prepared to write your story, to control your story, you can turn these into wins. I mean, it has to be sincere.
And finally, Tony, what advice do you have for our next generation of crisis communicators?
Yeah, well, you know what? Because I've got this company and I employ a team and we're growing, and I don't think there's any staff member we bring in that doesn't say, "Oh, I want to do crisis comms." So you come in and join our team, and you're a PR. You're working in PR, so you're on the fun side of things. You're promoting brands, but everyone, bright people want to do heavy hitting work, want to do crisis comms. So I would say my advice is, do the work to learn it, and it's not hard. Everyone wants to do it. And for example, internally, we've got all of our IP on online learning platforms for all the staff to consume. But everyone wants to do that work and get those big opportunities. But the number of people actually reading all the IP and becoming an expert in it is much smaller. So, when I left the ABC starting this company, I had no clients. and it was a fight to find clients, right? So I spent 3 or 4 years finding clients. And then so my diary went from empty year one as a consultant. I filled it with going to the gym every morning. I never prior to that, never went to the gym. I filled it with networking events. And that was the only structure in my diary. So I would do cold calling outreach to find clients, and I tap into my network to find clients. But when I was kind of just exhausted from that and had spare minutes or hours, I'd block out time to study this stuff. You got to put the work in. I think, you got the aspiration to do it. I don't mean to be too brutal. I say big deal, really big deal. But are you prepared to do the work? Then you're going to be the top 1%. I've never interviewed anyone with an aspiration to do crisis media work that could sit there and give me 5 decent examples of people doing things well. And I think that's 2 hours study. It isn't even hard. If you're prepared to do the work, you'll be in the top 1%. And I think you'll be getting work very quickly. I think that's the only difference.
It's great advice, Tony, and thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise with us today. It's been great to learn about your work at Good Talent Media and your career, and we wish you all the best with your future crisis management.